people who carry out all-night parties known as blues parties, which go on all night, day after day, and cause a tremendous amount of disruption to the other tenants. And the Patel family are not like that. They're a nice family who will soon fit in, and there'll be no real problem. They'll get to know their neighbours, and there'll be no real problem. It's the all-night blues parties, let's face it, which some young Afro-Caribbeans carry out, causing a tremendous confusion.
If they can survive the moving in, Ted, what are you doing?
My main fear is public order, obviously. I mean, at the moment they're shouting, but what I try and do is make sure it doesn't get any worse, so it's not shouting, it's bricks through windows. And unlike this gentleman here who would go over and sort of, you know, ask them and plead with them, I think I'd be tempted to tell them that,
What are you sticking up for them? Aren't you English?
They've as much right to be there as anybody else. And
It's typical of you cops.
that's right.
I mean, why don't you take care of us?
I am taking care of you.
Well, get these people off our property.
They've as much right to be there as you have, and they're staying. And I say that they're staying. And if you don't act properly, if you throw bricks through their windows, then unfortunately we'll fall out and you'll come in.
You'll arrest us?
I certainly will.
Wow.
I think you need to step back and decide what your objectives are. And I have the police there in the background. They have a clear remit, identify every single member on that picket who was a tenant on that estate. And it's a tenancy condition, no nuisance, aggravated by racial harassment. And I would want that information so I can decide what
I'm astounded any of you are there.
In practice, what I think does happen is that the Patels are going to be there on their own. I don't think any council officers, however well-paid they may be, however conscientious they may be, most community organizations are going to be there. This talk of support network, I think, is just nothing but a lot of hot air. Really, the Patels are going to face the situation on their own, and I think we've got to be a lot more responsible.
If this is happening on the day the Patels try to move in, should the inspector make arrests?
I would say, of course, I mean...
How do you feel about making arrests, Inspector?
Not a very pleasant situation to be in, because in some ways it's a no-win, because as you said, you'll go away and say, yeah, typically sides with those. It is a no-win situation. But I also, as he says, I've got to preserve the peace. And if people are committing offences and you can't reason with them...
The police officer at that stage has the power to arrest for public order offence.
Absolutely.
What they are doing, they've got a crowd behind them, and this crowd is inciting the others to say, get these packies out of here. That's the mood, and that mood is threatening, and that can bring about a breach of the peace. They should be arrested.
But don't you think there's a potential danger there? I myself, I don't want to create martyrs amongst the racists, so I don't see the police as the answer. I think the police will make the situation worse when they're there. And
what I'm hearing you say is, all things considered, get them into the flat, but try not to make alienating arrests.
That's right.
Yes. Don't get them in there. What you want to do is to get that picket away. Having identified the people on that picket, I'd be down to Judge Pickles and I'd want an injunction. And prevention is much more important than heavy-handed response from the police. And I would get an injunction against each of those tenants, restraining them from interfering with part of John Black's family.
This is unrealistic. Most white working class people are not racist. And the majority of the white people will be on the side of the police and the Patels and will be pressuring the minority, the small racist minority.
They want peace. They want to return to the tranquil days.
English people, white English people are fair-minded. It's only a very small minority who are not. And
well, can I ask Judge Pickles this? If I arrived at 2 o'clock with my affidavit, ex parte, wanting an injunction, and I had identified A, B, C, and D on that picket line, would he have given it to me there and then?
Well, not ex parte, no.
Why not?
Well, because we only grant ex parte injunctions in the case of real emergency, and I don't think this is one.
Let me just move that clock forward. Let me just move it forward a little bit. They move in. The problems persist. One day that brick does come through the window. Next day, bangers are put through the letterbox, explode inside, scaring the Patels, forcing them to move the small children to the back of the apartment. The next day, excrement, human excrement, is pushed in. And the following week, young Atol, a 7-year-old, is beaten up and his face pushed in dog mess. What are you doing, Inspector?
Well, that clearly now is my problem. That really has gone far, beyond any reason. My area beat officer will be tasked to go onto that area, and if necessary, he'll sit up in a plain van or do whatever, catch people, bring things through his door, and arrest them. You can't tolerate that.
Earlier than letting it get to that stage. Yes, very much earlier.
You're devoting how much by way of resource?
The bigger the problem, the bigger the resource. Initially it would be the area beat officer who works on that community and knows the people who live there.
Yeah.
By this stage, you ought to have 24-hour police protection. Would you provide that?
This is why I'm saying we'd act early on. As soon as the family had moved in and we'd had these problems outside, we'd be paying attention to that house. I'm not saying I'm going to put a policeman there 24 hours a day, so just patently obvious I cannot do that.
Yeah, but the police is prepared to give 24-hour protection to all sorts of people, like Salman Rushdie, for instance. Why can't they protect the Patel family?
For the very simple reason that there are so many people who need protection.
But if the police were to protect the Patel family properly, then a lot of other people wouldn't attack other Patel families up and down the country, because they know that there'd be an instant response from the police. Now, the fact of the matter is that this whole situation is fictitious. The council officers wouldn't be there, the police wouldn't be there, the beat officer wouldn't be there, and that is a fact.
And quite often, housing officers will feel that these people are only being difficult. It's a neighbourly dispute anyway. It probably will resolve. And they're not taking the matter seriously. And when we talk about police resources, if it was reported to the police that somebody upon the estate is selling a little weed, we would probably have somebody in a police car keeping, clearly watching the place. But racism and harassment isn't all that serious, so it will go away.
What on earth are you going to do about the number of tenants who have actually breached the conditions of their tenancy agreement? Perhaps you should start from there. What are you going to do about those tenants?
All right, let's pursue that. Mr. Patel, now displaying the strength of Ms. Johnson, says to you, look, the time has come to enforce the leases. Little Johnny Jones was the boy who beat up my son, Ato, and pushed his face in the dog nest. What are you going to do about that?
How old is little Johnny? 10 or over. Under 10 or over 10.
He is 9 1/2.
The police can't prosecute, but at the end of the day, that tenant is responsible for controlling that child, and if that child has been causing a nuisance, I would hold that tenant responsible and would be in breach of their conditions.
Right. Then we can I just make the point that because the police can't prosecute, that doesn't mean we don't do an investigation, and that I would hope when that had been reported to us, we would have investigated, and that would have been interviewed with his parents.
Mr. Jones.
Yep.
Let me tell you about Mr. Jones.
Please do.
Mr. Jones is probably the most popular tenant on the estate. He's been the head of the Tenants Association. He has organized Sunday football. He has improved rubbish collection on the estate. He's a Falklands veteran.
He's just the man who's going to listen to me, hopefully, and keep his son under control.
Well, talk to me.
Oh, I'm telling you, you know what your son has done. This is totally unacceptable. Did you know this was happening? Did you know what your son's attitude was?
I certainly did, and I'm damn glad he did it.
Well, Mr. Jones is totally irresponsible.
I can't even get a job in this country now. All the shops are owned by them. You're English, like me.
I've no sympathy with those views. And you're an irresponsible parent, and if you're teaching your son to behave like that, to take on attitudes like that, it reflects in his behaviour, he's breaking the law, and you're coming into the position where the social services most certainly would be looking at whether you were a suitable parent to be looking after that child.
Can you evict me, Mr. Saunders?
Providing I have that evidence, that's reported to our committee. If they think, on their legal advice they're given, that we have sufficient evidence to do a prosecution, that will be the next step. Beyond that, it's a case then of producing the evidence.
What am I being prosecuted for? Having an unruly son?
A breach of a tenancy condition that says the tenant shall not discriminate or harass anybody on the grounds of noise, racial habits, racial issues, gender, sex, whatever. And
how often do tenants get evicted from the estate?
The problem then depends on what the judge says.
Before it even goes to the judge, we have another hurdle which hasn't been mentioned, which is the legal department.
That's right. They've got to satisfy themselves.
Which is an impossibility.
Yeah.
They've got to deliver.
An impossibility?
It is an actual impossibility, and that is where the blockage is.
I think you was
the question.
You wouldn't get a view from legal section because they invariably refuse to go with these cases.
Why?
Because they know judges like Judge Pickles will say, no, this is not a case of racial harassment, get out of here.
There's two problems, sir. I think firstly, legal departments are conservative with a small c. And secondly, most legal departments, just like most lawyers, just like most people in the legal profession, do not accept racial harassment as a crime.
It also turns out that Mr. Jones may well have been the perpetrator of the vandalism. Would you recommend prosecution?
It depends what you mean by may have. That there's
Well, you have evidence, the way you police get evidence. It looks pretty good. It's...
Yeah, if we had evidence that met the Attorney General's guidelines, then we would recommend prosecution.
Prosecution. So he stands to be evicted, and this Falklands hero stands to be prosecuted. Aha. Ms. Graham, he wants you as his barrister.
I wouldn't represent him.
Why?
I would not represent him because, as far as I'm concerned, I could not do his case justice. I would be embarrassed by virtue of my own position, my own views, and my duty in the court setting is to be a professional lawyer. And I would not believe that I was capable of fulfilling that duty in this instance.
Because he's white?
Because of what he is and who I am. He's a racist.
You're going against the rules of the bar.
Clearly. And I would have to take that up in the way I possibly could. But
it should be detached.
I should be detached.
Prepared to defend anybody whom you're instructed to defend.
The reality of it is I wouldn't be instructed to represent him in the first place anyway, because they know my views.
But he's a clever man. And he views this as one of those ironies of life, that perhaps with you defending him, he would stand a better chance.
This case would be not be the first time it happened. It happens to black lawyers up and down the country, and I would have to take my chances before the Bar Council.
As you're caught between your personal ethics and views and your supposed professional responsibility.
Clearly. And because, as far as I'm concerned, I am professional, I conduct myself in a professional way, but I was a black person before I was a professional. And the feelings that I have and who I am cut very deep. And I have got to live with me.
You don't have to believe in your client's case. You're on the cab rank and you're there to be hired by anybody who comes along and instructs you. You should be detached and objective and fair-minded about it and not throw yourself into the thing with your own beliefs. That's what makes it difficult for some black counsel.
Clearly
and why
does.
they clash with the bench, because they cannot be detached and objective.
I think you ought to be quite clear, it's not a problem for black barristers. There are numerous white QCs who also don't obey the cab rank principle, and the reason they do it is financial. They'll turn down legal aid briefs because they can get better paid privately.
I assume you're siding with Ms. Graham.
I would not want to represent that racist.
Judge, she said she was black before she was a barrister.
She was. But if she's a capable barrister, as I'm sure she has the potentiality for being.
I am. I haven't got the potentiality for being. I am a capable barrister.
Then she can be objective like an actor.
If that rule applies to me, then it applies to judges.
Judges are colourblind.
That's a nonsense, Judge Pickles, with all due respect to you.
This is a very good example why the legal avenue is not the relevant avenue to take a case of racial harassment down. There is no solution down that road. The council brazenly talk about upholding the law, but upholding the law may mean creating an even worse situation. And there may be, as it happens, a far better way to deal with the problem.
Yeah, but what Keith is, if we accept what Keith is saying, what you're saying is that black people should never challenge the judicial system at all. So therefore you as a white person are telling us that we are condemned the second-class status if we don't challenge the bigger